Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on managing supply chain amidst COVID-19. Before we start with the formal session, may I request you all to keep your devices on mute throughout the webinar. Post your questions in the chat box and we'll take it up in the relevant session. I now invite Ms. Payal S. Kanwar, Director General, Indo-French Chamber, for the welcome address. Over to you, Payal.
Thank you so much, Tessie. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well and that you're in good health. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for this important webinar, which is being organized with the initiative of the IFCCI Logistics Committee. I'd like to start by welcoming our special guest, Shri N. Shivasailam, former Special Secretary of Logistics. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you. A few words about IFCCI, which is a not-for-profit bilateral chamber of commerce that promotes business between France and India. Today, we represent a network of close to 700 member companies spread across the country and in France. And during the time of COVID-19, since these past few weeks now, the Chamber has been very active in supporting companies on various issues. Just to give you an example, we've launched 2 surveys. We've worked on CSR issues. We've organized about close to 30 webinars, including today's. And we've also been very active with our 16 committees. So just to give you a perspective of what's been going on, today's webinar will focus on how supply chain and logistics will revive once the economy comes back. And I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I'd like to extend a special thank you to Vaibhav Vora, who's with us. He's the chairman of the Logistics Committee. Thank you so much, Vaibhav. And thank you to Tessie as well from our team. She's also been very involved in putting this together today. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a great session. And I'd now like to pass over to Vaibhav Vora, who is the chairman of the IFCCI Logistics Committee. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Payal. Thank you so much. So good morning and welcome everyone. So I wanted to thank everyone for their participation and actually just set the tone of our webinar today, which is centered around managing of supply chain in this tough time of Corona, COVID-19. Now the COVID crisis has revealed the actual fragility of the modern supply chain. Recent data has shown the devastating economic impact as week-on-week trade in the US, Europe, and in India has halved because of this crisis. Now, there has been diverse sourcing and digitalization have always been the key points that have been coming up in the last couple of weeks with an approach towards smarter supply chains to ensure a more lasting recovery. So this COVID-19 pandemic has hit global trade and investment at an unprecedented speed and rate and scale. Multinational companies faced an initial supply shock, then a demand shock, as more and more countries ordered people to stay home. Governments, businesses, individual consumers suddenly struggled to produce basic products and materials and were forced to confront the fragility of the modern supply chain. There is now an urgent need to design smarter, stronger, and more diverse supply chains. And that is one of the major lessons of this crisis. COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerability of complex supply chains, which have been built on lean manufacturing practices and cost historically. The impact of this lockdown and in key areas and countries of manufacturing have further highlighted the problem with modern supply chains. Especially with the Chinese factories closing down, manufacturers struggled to pivot due to a lack of flexibility in their supplier base. One likely consequence is that global firms will diversify their supply chains in the future. Instead of relying only on China and building manufacturing hubs further and investing further in countries like India. We also see that there is a decentralization of manufacturing capacity with companies looking to bring production to their home countries. Also, the trend that grows with the likes of automation and small batch production, which had become cheap, that a number of countries have started moving portions of their supply chain back home. policymakers may be increasingly pressured to consider whether certain products need to be manufactured in the country or in the region. Now, this transition to a new model for supply chain is of paramount importance. And what is our preparedness to handle this change and challenge? With that said, I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Mr. N. Sivasailam, former Special Secretary Logistics and a great mentor and friend to the supply chain and logistics fraternity in India. Now, whatever I say to introduce Sir would be an injustice to his good work and reputation, but I will try my best in brief. Shri N. Sivasailam is the former Special Secretary Logistics, Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. Prior to his assignment, he served as a Special Secretary in the Department of Telecom, Government of India. He has served in the Department of Health and Family Welfare and Medical Education, Forest Ecology and Environment Departments of the Government of Karnataka as Principal Secretary. Now, with that short introduction, I just want to pass it over to Sir to give us his opening remarks, please. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Thank you, Payal. Thank you, Tessie. Thank you, Indo-French Chamber of Commerce and Industry for having invited me to this wonderful webinar on where do we go from now after this COVID crisis. Very interesting times, I would say now than in what it was about a month ago. And Vaibhav has laid the foundation for today's discussion and raised three very pertinent issues. I would also I would like to address them definitely because it was also on my agenda, and I would also address certain key takeaways going forward for the Indo-French Chamber of Commerce, which will make a difference between the which could make a difference between the pre-COVID and the post-COVID situation. First is the first point which he mentioned was the approach towards smarter supply chains. Now, it's always good to say that you should have smarter supply chains. In fact, it's much easier to have the electronic systems and all in a logistic framework, but the problem is not here. The problem of smartness in supply chains lies outside the supply chains because of various institutions who have their own agenda. For example, even in our own country, what we thought about this contactless systems, and for 5 years people were asking for it, but it happened in a week with the customs making everything contactless, whereas for the last 5 years hundreds of excuses were being touted as to why a particular thing cannot be done, why contacts is required, how it has to be checked. Today, suddenly we find that everything is okay. Tomorrow, we are going to see passenger movement in our airport. From 25th, we're going to see passenger movement in our airports. Suddenly, the public has been telling right from the time frisking was there to say, why do you need to be frisked at all? Today, we have done away with it. Not that we are going to be less secure because of that. So these are a lot of mindsets, what I would call entrenched interests, which exists, which prevents supply chains from being smarter. So I would appeal that every institution must contribute to supply chain smartness, because while we can create the environment for smartness, for being smart, the smartness actually lies is actually an institutional paradigm rather than an infrastructure paradigm. It's very important for people to realize this aspect of smartness as we go forward. My second point was extremely well said, Vaibhav. You talked about vulnerability of complex systems. Now that's just carrying on from what I left in the previous one, I just provided you the explanation. The complexity does not come from the system. In fact, the system internalizes the black box. The complexity comes from what I would call the realm of politics. There is one group wanting to say, okay, I need to be controlling this agenda. So the complexity of supply chains comes from what I would call the political agenda of its stakeholders. And we need to address that on the platform. The simplest way of going about it is mandate platforms. Even in air cargo, if you mandate platforms, you're through. And if everybody plugs into it, that's the way to go ahead. And that's where we have a great opportunity in the Indo-French Chamber of Commerce itself as we go ahead, about which I will come to you a little later. However, one question which you asked, and I must say that all of us participating in this webinar must be sensitive to it. Everybody says that you're going to everybody is going to produce everything. Everybody is going to have Atmanirbhar. So if everybody becomes Atmanirbhar, where does the trade go? Now that's a question to be asked. Now that's where I would say that when we talk about Atmanirbhar, I think we can expand this whole thing to be the key word is assurance. And that's what India did to the world in the pharma sector. India's pharma was open. Maybe over the first 1 week, people suspected that India may hold to its pharma, but that did not happen. And people, I see Vipin there. I mean, he was amongst the forefront to ensure that the things opened up. And India, later on, after a week, India was known to be a very reliable supplier of pharma products, and pharma was going everywhere from India to the world. India for the world is the motto. And that's where the credibility of this country as a reliable, the key element in business is reliability. As long as you provide the assurance and reliability, people are going to take it. And reliability cannot be substituted by bank guarantees. Let me tell you that. There cannot be any bank guarantees which can substitute for assurance and reliability. And the key word which we have established to the world this time over is India is a reliable partner. When you manufacture anything in India, you can always partake of it. And we can also make it important by telling that certain amount of goods will always be available for export, so that when a situation like this comes, we don't have internal people holding up things and saying that no, it should be here. Even that element can be done with a protocol. So I think, Vaibhav, all the three issues which you raised are pertinent and going forward, and not just on the they are not just rhetorical questions. They are questions which needs to be addressed by practical action. And I'm grateful to you that you have identified the three big things which needs to be addressed. I do believe that chambers of commerce like yours, which are which are by country, Indo-French. French is a very important partner for India and a growing partnership. I think the three questions which you asked, the quicker you address them and the quicker you put in place the protocols, the quicker you are smarter, the quicker you break down the complexities through better smartness, and the quicker we are going to go ahead. I have some areas for the Indo-French Chamber to consider going forward. You must have heard the announcement of the finance minister following the prime minister's address on certain new reforms. One of the things which was mentioned was the MRO sector. MRO is particularly important, and mind you, people are just telling that if you got the GST reduced for MRO, that's going to make no impact. The problem of MRO in India lies elsewhere. It is in the availability of spares, on the assured availability of spares. It's no different from treating a pharma sector in India for the world. Similarly, it's also to be MRO for the world. And in this France is a very, very important player for India. Now, I see one of our members is also Safran. They are manufacturers of engines. An engine is almost a 40% component of aircraft, and one of the most critical components of aircraft. There's no doubt about it. So it is time we address this MRO issue and ensure that we get what I would call the spares, the important spares comprising of the engine, the undercarriage, and of course, the electronics are not much of a problem. It's available, and they are available at cost-effective rates. But the undercarriage and the engine are something which we need to address. And it is possible for Indo-French Chamber to address it, because both Airbus, which is a member of this Indo-French Chamber of Commerce, as well as Safran, are in a position to create a vibrant MRO system for the world, in which not only the French and the partners of Airbus, others, and Safran and its and the numerous customers which it will have can partake in the MRO system established in India for the world. I'm not trying to say that we should be monopolizing it, but the way forward in all these international collaboration is to be part of value chains, never be an exclusive producer of the whole thing. It's not in our interest, it's not in the world's interest to have an exclusive production. But should we be in a position to have something like a collaborative effort, an effort by which it is open to stakeholders to participate, but we have the spares at a much cheaper rates than what we presently get. It is possible for India to create, not only along with France, definitely France is a major partner, but Indo-French partnership for the world could be a major, could make aviation profitable again. Because today, the major problem of airlines is not in buying aircrafts, but it is in maintaining them. So it maintains the companies, but kills the airlines and kills the people working in the ordinary business of flying. That's the way I would like to look at it. I have evidence willing to work with all of you, but it requires some great support from Airbus and Safran, and maybe one of the two big guys, Pratt and Whitney or GE, or Rolls-Royce, to get us going on this. So this is one major area which I would suggest. Second is something which is important in rail. We have one high-speed rail with the Japanese collaboration. I think we should have a quick one through the Indo-French. And I'm more, I have worked with both the agencies, and it should be possible to be working with AFD to have a smaller stretch of high-speed rail, which could be faster. I mean, the Delhi to Mumbai may be a longer one, taking time, but the Chennai-Bangalore one could be a much easier one. Chennai-Bangalore, Trivandrum one could be a much easier one going forward. That could be a French collaboration. And as you know, in railways, there are only two poles. Either there is a Japanese pole or there is a French pole. And the French railway system, to which I'm accustomed to, Alstom is there, Sistra is there, Thales are there. I worked with all of them. They are possibly amongst the best you can get in this whole world. And it is time that we address the ecosystem in this three companies which I mentioned. I think the whole high-speed rail ecosystem is available, and many more could also join. And that's a quick demonstration of that on another platform would be a major game changer in India. The last of it I will come to is in shipping, and that's where Indo-French Chamber of Commerce with Vaibhav's theme of partnerships can come through. Yes, it is not too difficult now, Vaibhav, to have a collaborative effort in document sharing. It's possible from port to port. If it is possible to establish a relationship between the French ports going up to Marseille, or even on the other side to Havre and then to Paris, well, it's possible to have a good understanding on transmission of documents, transmission of bill of lading, so that people on the other side, even India's exports to France is also facilitated as much as the EU exports to India. And it's not too difficult. Come through the Mediterranean and we are through the Red Sea, and we are in, and that's possible. But things are made difficult through certain methods, like if we could have a quick pact on testing. I don't say testings need not be there, but it is very bad if a product is sent and is rejected at the French port. If it could be organized reciprocally on either side, that if you on a certain set of things like pharmaceuticals, or whether it is perishables, if it is checked here and taken, and then we take the responsibility of the supply chain, logistics. Logistics cannot be made responsible for the inherent quality of the product. Logistics can be responsible for preserving the quality of the product, but logistics cannot take the responsibility of the inherent quality. If you say that a particular thing should have these as the following ingredients, and you land up with that being above the permitted levels, there is nothing which logistics can do about it. And but invariably the logistics gets caught in this crossfire, and we have a problem. And next day the logistics business itself ceases. And although for a lot many things it may be viable, so I would strongly request that if Indo-French Chamber of Commerce would be willing to work on this issue quickly. I think it's a EU-India deal, which is, I think, overdue. But the time the COVID has brought to notice that this is the right time to go for it. India-EU trade deal needs to be quickened so that we reap the benefit. And of course, in that, the Indo-French partnership can always provide the necessary catalyst to get through these important covenants and agreements, and it can always facilitate in a manner which sees the rise of trade and ability for logistics to support that trade after having established the manner. Thanks a lot. I've had my 6 points. About 10 minutes. Sorry for that, but I think enough for a discussion over this webinar. And should there be questions, I'm willing to take them. If you want to talk to me, my email is always there. And should we be in a position to take things forward, I can tell you that I'll be the happiest among all of you to see that things happen on this front. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Indo-French Chamber. Thanks a lot, Vaibhav. Thanks a lot, Payal. Thanks a lot, Tessie, and thanks a lot for all of you for having been very patient listeners to my monologue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sivaselam, for that very powerful and insightful opening speech. I would now like to invite our speakers for the webinar, who are our knowledge partners from Kocher & Co. I would like to invite Ms. Shampa Bhattacharya, who's a partner in the indirect tax practice of the firm. She has a decade and a half of qualification in corporate and civil law with exclusive specialization of more than 10 years in the domain. I would also like to invite Rajeshri Chakrabarti, who's a senior partner and heads the Mumbai office of Kocher & Co. His practice focuses on corporate commercial transactions with emphasis on regulatory environment and risk mitigation. He has assisted clients across diverse sectors such as logistics, transportation, engineering, retail, biotechnology, telecom, IT and ITS, e-commerce, private equity, and venture capital. Rajeshri, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and partnering with Indo-French Chamber of Commerce on this very important topic on managing supply chain amidst COVID-19. Now, this is something which is unprecedented, the situation that we are passing through. So obviously, this analysis is probably going to be the key for many future decisions that all of you would be taking in your respective industries. So today, before the panel discussion begins, what we propose to do is to have a very short presentation that will be done by me and my partner Shampa. So in the first part of the presentation, what I will give is a brief overview of the regulatory situation currently in the country pursuant to the lockdown. What have been some of the key learnings from our perspective as lawyers, and what we see as the future are issues that will assume significance going forward. After that part is over, my partner Shampa will give the perspective from tax and other related issues. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So broadly, this is the agenda for today's discussion. Next slide, please. Next. Next slide, please. So as you can see, I think we have skipped one. So if you can go back to the previous one. Please go back to the previous slide. I think we have kind of skipped two. There are, yeah, please stay here. So as you can see that the lockdown began on 25th of March, but even prior to that, with the evolving scenario in China, our government had started taking various initiatives, starting with the Finance Ministry's notification on February 19th, which talked about disruption in the supply chains, and this was considered as force majeure condition in supply contracts relating to government. Similar notifications were issued subsequently by other ministries like Shipping Ministry, the Ministry for New and Renewable Energy, etc., etc. So therefore, the recognition of the problem had been there from the very beginning with the unfolding events across the globe. And of course, then came the major notifications of 20th of March onwards, when Ministry of Home Affairs, along with the other ministries of Government of India and various state governments, started issuing number of advisories and directions to deal with COVID-19. Now, some of the key things that you need to note here is the one relating to Labor and Employment Ministry's directive or advisory to various employers in relation to payment of wages and in relation to continuity of service of their workforce. And that assumed a lot of significance, as we will see going forward. Next slide, please. Some of the other significant measures that the government introduced at this time is in relation to Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Recognizing the financial stress that the industry would be going through, the government enhanced the limit for filing proceedings before the NCLT from 1 lakh rupees to 1 crore rupees. There were a lot of guidance and relaxations issued by Reserve Bank of India in relation to loan repayment. Similarly, to ensure ease of doing business during these difficult times, CBDT, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, came out with their own norms which relaxed various requirements under Income Tax Act or under Indian Companies Act. Next slide, please. Now, this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. On ground issues, what we have seen is that while the intention of the government had been very clear, that government wanted to have the maximum ease of operations while keeping in mind the very grave situation, and it issued multiple notifications. At times, we have seen the gap between the government policies and on-ground implementation. Our distinguished panel will talk more about it, so I will not really go into the details. The other challenge that we have seen is the distinction between essential and non-essential commodity. And in fact, this is particularly true in our experience from the logistics and supply chain industries, because that distinction we felt was probably a little artificial and which hampered the ultimate objective, which is to say, run the essential services. We will again talk about that during the course of the panel discussion. Similarly, the lack of uniformity between center and state guidelines created some issues. The other major area where we saw some rapid discussions happening is in the field of contract performance. Now, the primary issues there was can COVID-19 be considered to be a force majeure event where performance of one of the contracting parties can be excused, or one of the parties can claim exemption from liability. So broadly speaking, two issues we have addressed in such scenarios. One is what is known as the doctrine of frustration under Indian Contract Act, that is, very simply put, when the performance of a contract becomes impossible. So we have seen companies coming up with those kind of issues, and we had to take corrective measures in that sense. The Indian judiciary has been alive to the situation, and the filings have now been made online. There are hearings going on through video conferencing. Of course, there are certain challenges, both in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of the bandwidth of the court as to how much it can do remotely. But it is encouraging to note that the judiciary has been taking up urgent matters and granting reliefs wherever required. Couple of major cases that we have handled, and we have been appearing before courts through video conferencing. One related to force majeure, where the Bombay High Court gave a very, I'll say, important order, where it said that the lockdown may not be the legal basis always for repudiation of a contract. Now, I hasten to add that this is something which is extremely case specific or fact specific. So it doesn't necessarily mean that in every situation a party can either repudiate or insist upon performance of a contract. One has to judge the facts and circumstances of every case. Similarly, on salary and wage payments, there was a lot of concern expressed by the industry in light of the notification of the government of March 29th, which purportedly directed the employers not to reduce salaries under any circumstances. And there were reports across the country where employers were possibly threatened with prosecution under the Disaster Management Act and other provisions of law. So Supreme Court came up with the guidance that an order that no coercive action can be taken till such time the pending cases before Supreme Court are finally heard and adjudicated. But fortunately, what happened was the latest order of Ministry of Home Affairs, dated May 17th, revoked its earlier orders, which including the order of March 29th. So therefore, the immediate concern about payment of full wages to workers during the period of lockdown has abated. Next slide, please. Now, this is what we see as the future, and these are some of the major issues that we believe will be confronting the supply chain and logistics industries. At the first instance, what we see is that there will be an evolution of technology-led business models. So you have use of AI and cloud and so on, which would come into place. There will be reduced dependency on physical labor. Working from home would be the norm for many industries, as we have already seen. And we will talk a little bit more about this aspect also during the course of our panel discussion. Some of the most important issues which we feel as lawyers would be important for the industry to note would be to have contingency plan and crisis management plan for any such scenario. Now, God forbid, We don't want another COVID-19 recurrence, but you never know. Mother Nature is not always very kind to us. So that needs to be well in place to address scenarios such as these. And similarly, the governance teams should be very much in place to address the challenges that the industry would face. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I would now request my colleague Shampa to talk about the tax perspective. Over to you, Shampa. Next slide, please. You can move to the next slide. Shampa, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Let me take you through the major indirect tax relief measures, and I'll have to speeden it up a little because we're running behind schedule. So if anybody has some issues, please interrupt in between. So we'll go in with the customs changes that have been brought about. Generally speaking, tax policy influences global supply chain management because it affects supply chain's cost of doing business in or between given jurisdictions. Let us look at the measures which can be utilized as incentives and alternatives for a game changer in the supply chain. There is a strong motive of generating high revenues during the pandemic behind the Indian government's new policies that have been announced, especially for imports and exports. Typically, goods clearance as customs port is a time-consuming process due to strict clearance timings. However, during the crisis stage, a 24/7 custom clearance has been introduced to prevent any delay in the supply chain. For clearance of bonds, for clearance of goods, a bond is to be submitted, which is eased as of now till 15 June 2020. Further, a major reform which has been suggested is shipping lines at Indian seaports are advised not to impose container detention charges on import and export. However, this has been officially notified till 3rd of May 2020, but be ipso facto, it could be taken in that due to lockdown, it may get continued, but we still do not have any official orders on this. India continues to enjoy the benefits of preferential trade tariff under various free trade agreements and comprehensive economic trade agreements, SEPA with Japan, Malaysia. The government has foreseen the compliance issues with respect to availing such preferential duty and relaxed the norms for submission of certificates of origin of goods. Coming down to GST, we witness a waiver of late fee and benefit of reduced rate of interest for delayed payment of tax, which is definitely a welcome step towards relaxing compliance obligations during these turbulent times. It also has extended the validity of e-way bills for free movement of goods from one state to another. Moving on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Where we broadly look at the key measures and extension of the existing foreign trade policy. So the validity of foreign trade policy has been extended to 31st March 2021, which has the similar schemes under export promotions and foreign trade. A continued relief on exemption from payment of integrated tax, which is a GST component of the customs duty, and compensation cess on imports made under specific schemes like advance authorization or your export promotion capital goods, has been extended till 31st March 2021. Similar benefits have been extended to EOU, STPs, biotechnology parks. All duty-free import authorizations under AE and APCG have also been extended from 31st July 2020 to another next 6 months. Coming down to the next slide. Let's look at, there are a number of other relief measures which have been announced under tax, but we've been able to cover the major ones. Now let's see what are the main catch points through which these tax measures we can actually utilize and incentivize to have a regular supply chain with no issues and hindrances. These tax intensive and safe reliefs can be fruitfully utilized to navigate the immediate supply chain and logistic issues. One, improve working capital management, which is short-term cash flow optimization. Second, minimizing operational risk of incoming flows, raw materials and outgoing flows, product deliveries, and consider alternatives, that is to increase global trade compliance, seamless trade and cost reductions. Let's look at the first point. Can we move to the next slide? Next slide. Thank you. The COVID-19 outbreak may force us to reimagine the current model of supply chain. It may present us with opportunities to create more resilient, better connected, and more efficient supply chains. One needs to look at this supply chain as a whole, not only from a logistic perspective, but also including the tax element. Let's see, indirect taxes are consumption taxes, wherein goods are entering a territory, the tax is due. In this crisis, which are totally unprecedented in times, we see that it put a lot of pressure on cash flow. Why? For the simple reason that inventory is growing, goods are coming in, but are not supplied, taxes are to be paid, but not sold, and no collections. So the idea is to organize with the supply chain to include the element of tax, which is the above the line cost. How can I get to reduce the gap between the taxes being paid for the goods being supplied and collected the same from the customers? It would be prudent to exercise the choice of opting for indirect tax schemes which would defer the payment of indirect taxes. So technically improving the working capital management on a short-term basis. So one of the most important duty deferment schemes which has been introduced and which has been existing under the customs has been the manufacture and other operations in warehouse regulations for manufacturers who are importing raw materials and capital goods and undertaking manufacturing in private bonded warehouse. This scheme encouragingly happens to be the answer to working capital issues because it defers your tax payment for import of capital goods and spare parts. And once these capital goods are sold domestically, then we need to pay a tax portion, which is the applicable rate. If they are exported back after being used, there is no tax component on it. So it's a big saving factor which businesses can look into. Coming into the next point. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, thank you. It is equally important to think about alternatives, making sure that in incoming flows, the source of raw materials, semi-finished products are not delivered or being delivered with delay or quality and other types of problems. We have indirect tax schemes to enable to tackle these issues from a tax and finance perspective, but it's equally imperative to find an alternative to mitigate, to reduce the impact this alternative could have on your financial perspectives on your activities. For outgoing flows, while we are in the middle of it, in the future, make sure that one is still able to deliver your products to your clients in a covered way. What we see now is a contraction of resources that can deliver the goods to the clients. This is definitely to be taken into your policy and procedures. So due to this COVID-19, there has been a great change in the cost of freight and delivery charges because everybody wishes to do online shopping, which is increased and due to the quarantine season prefers to do online shopping. So taking this huge amount of online shopping, the freight and freight out charges has been increased by a huge margin. Cost the buyer a double price of products along with delivery charges. So the buyers are worried because of this. They must contact their sellers and negotiate about the prices. So one of the options to do is instead of having a 10 to 20% hike on the entire cost price because of freight, it is advisable to opt for a FOB scenario where the exporter avoid paying the shipping price directly, and a similar model can be adopted in the domestic market too, looking into the conditions as to how the business is functioning. Coming to the last point as to which is the most important is the seamless trade and cost reductions. The next slide, please. In terms of crisis, the reflex is that if you need to deliver to client, we are keen to accept more cost. Now pay attention to the cost leakage, which will lead to tax leakage, because it's a double jeopardy effect that more cost will lead to a higher taxable base, leading to more tax outflow. So let's mitigate by utilizing right tax incentive import schemes, such as exploring interest equalization schemes, which gives the pre and post shipment credits to the exporters in the currency rupees, reduce rate of tariffs if possible from countries under which we have free trade agreements with like SEPA with Japan, or utilizing benefits and preferential treatments under other free trade agreements. Also harnessing other schemes under advance authorization. So in a shorter period of time, that's all that I have from a indirect tax point of view. Over to you, Raj.
Thank you, Shampa. So now we have the panel discussion, and we have a very, very distinguished panel today. So Mr. Sivasalam has already been introduced, so I'll move on to the other panelists. So we have Mr. Vipin Vora, who is the chairman of Continental Carriers Group of Companies. He has been a former director on the board of the High Tech Forwarders Network, also served as president of Air Cargo Agents Association of India. Currently, Mr. Vora is the convener, Air Freight Council of the Federation of Freight Forwarders Association of India. Next, we have Mr. Prashant Shukla, who heads the supply chain for Rocket India Private Limited. Prashant has over 25 years of experience in end-to-end supply chain in automobile packaging and FMCG industry. He has managed large-scale global agriculture, commodity procurement, and sustainability programs. And lastly, we have Mr. Avinav Sinha, who is currently heading the supply chain and logistics for Michelin India Private Limited, with over a decade of experience in supply chain. He has handled roles in different domains, including manufacturing, procurement, planning, and logistics across companies operating in various sectors, ranging from automotive to foods, personal care, etc. So with that, let me start with the panel because the time is short. We want to have the maximum questions during this time. Let me start with Mr. Vora, sir. I will refer to one of the opening remarks of Mr. Sivasailam that the approach needs to change from now on. So what would you see going forward, the new norm? Is it the working from home? And that relates to the other issue. Do we really need so many people in the industry? What are your thoughts, Mr. Vora?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this Indo-French Chamber of Commerce, and the panel discussion. And I'm grateful to Mr. Sivasalam, who have been here to help the industry when we all needed him, very badly. And he was working till late night, till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, helping the trade. Now, coming to your question, the whole thing has to be changed, In the last 60 days, what we have observed is that there are a lot of things have changed in the customs and even terminal operators, seaports, and other places. Previously, we were trying from the last 8 to 10 years that why we have to go to the airport or seaport to do our custom clearance. And every time it has to be man-to-man, interaction. But fortunately, because of this COVID thing, customs, they have really come up with a very, very simplified system where we can file the papers from our office, we can get the things done. There is very little need of our people going to the port or seaport to get the clearance done. So that is one big thing which we achieved during this COVID-19, which we were trying from last so many years. The other thing is that yes, you're right that once these things starts happening, which we are seeing now, it's happening. The staff which we have, definitely there'll be impact on that. We will be looking at different, different, what you call, team. Those who are very good in systems, working on the systems and all, rather than going to the airport manually doing all the clearances and all. So all those things needs to change in our organizations, and this will definitely have a little impact. I'll say not much, but definitely I'll say 20 to 25% impact on the staff, change of staff and, when removing the staff, that's what I can say.
Sure. Moving on to Prashant. Prashant, you are someone who has handled this on a day in, day out basis during the last weeks, I'll imagine. So what have been the biggest challenges that you have faced and what was your response to that?
Hi, thank you for having me here. And thanks for this question. Basically, we need to really identify this into two issues. One is internal response and the external response. As far as internal response is concerned, first and foremost thing going forward in next 6 to 9 months is that how do you really manage social distancing and how do you really manage all your operations from production to the gate management to the logistics in all these areas on loading, unloading, and dispatches. And when the truck reaches or the consignment reaches to the customer point, how are you assuring that it is safe and things like that. There have also been ever-changing regulations in order to suit the newer requirements by Government of India and the local authorities. So how do you really manage all of that within your plant is something which is extremely critical. Also, it was important to manage and it is going to important to manage for next 6 to 9 months, is to manage safety of your people and goods, and how you are containing these operations and not really spreading it to the larger world. How do you really contain it is one more thing which is going to come. So what we did is that obviously we had to really make our operations. We were part of essential goods, so we were allowed to manage all our 5 plants in India. We were operating them. But what we did is, at the trucking point, or when the truck comes to our factory, we actually digitalized entire value chain there and all the activities. What we said is that we will have a barcode, and the barcode will have all the invoicing numbers and things like that. So driver will only sit in the driver waiting area with all the facilities and little bit of a food for him, so that we are also managing his incentive to come to our factory in the crisis when drivers and trucks facilities were not so much liberally available. So these things actually helped us contain the safety, manage the safety of our people. When it became external world, we found that some of our customers who were operating in pharma and food sectors, who were running their factories, actually started asking for contactless deliveries, which is like more bulk. Can you do it palletized? So all of these situations actually came, and what we had to do is to manage some part of it. Obviously, all these things can't be developed overnight. So we really had to beef up on how we can really increase the bulk dispatches, which means that not the which can be handled by a forklift and things like that. So I think those automation, that particular activity is extremely important. The third and the most foremost thing which was very important was that we needed proper documentation across the value chain, where we should be able to get into a scrutiny by a local authority that whether we are essential or non-essential. So we needed a perfect documentation to really supply customer in time, is to have proper letters and proper approvals across the states, and also the request and the essential certificate from the customer itself. So I think all of this was extremely critical for us to manage all 5 factories and approximately 2,000 customers in 1,200 locations in India.
Great. Let me move to Avinav. Avinav, what has been your key learnings so far, and what were the major roadblocks that you encountered during this lockdown period?
Okay, so I'll start with the learning piece. So a very frank admission, I would say. So in terms of either we talk as individuals or business, or even if we talk about the government as well, it has been a shock that we were not prepared for sure. So we had done, even as business or individuals, multiple simulations in terms of what can be the crisis and the crisis management things as a part of yearly protocol and all. But I would be very frank to admit that we never took the scenario to the level that we are looking at now. So that is a very frank admission that when we are putting up crisis management strategies and all, we need to be far more conservative. In terms of the key learnings, I think the companies who have been conceptually doing better on the supply chain, basic supply chain concepts like inventory. So anybody who is caught up with a huge inventory in this time would be very difficult. It would be very difficult for them to survive. So a very key learning again, be very strong on the basics of supply chain. In terms of contracts and the cost structure that we have to build, I think again a big learning. Try to have as much of variable as possible. Obviously, it will never be 100% variable cost, but there are things which can be done on a variable basis as well. So, for example, like the norm today would be everybody having a dedicated warehouse. So, do we look towards say palletized space and an agreement basis the space that you use, and it would be more of a efficiency driving factor also, with multiple players sharing common spaces and all. I think we can move a little bit on that as well. Learning from, I would say, government or regulatory perspective would be that supply chain cannot be seen as essential or non-essential. It is an engine, so you cannot take one piston out of the engine and the engine still operates. So we have to look at it as a whole. But I would really commend the government that it has been acting very swiftly on the inputs coming from the market. So in the first week, when only essential commodities were allowed, we saw that even the essential commodity supply chain was getting disrupted, because vehicles doesn't work just one way. So if it has to go one route for essential, it might require a return journey from a non-essential perspective. And those learnings have been coming in very quick, I would say. Another learning, I think, what is important is to create a visibility, and that would also be touching upon the problem piece. So when the whole business was getting restarted, or there were relaxations coming down from government, everywhere across the ground at local levels, people were not, especially the enforcement agencies, were not very up to date on what were the regulations on ground right now. So that was one of the key problems that we faced. But again, I would say as a regulatory mechanism, things the communication started to come in very fast, and those are very powerful as well. And we have improved a lot much on that. In terms of what do we do now, would be I think everybody will have to look at options to conserve cash for sure, and inventory would play a big role on that. And we also have not to be very conservative. So what we'll have to do is to look for early signs for market recovery, and anybody who acts very fast would be the front runner in the whole race. So this is something that has to be kept in mind. We cannot be conservative to the last extent. We have to be pragmatic and take our options well.
Sure. Taking the cue from what all of you have said so far, now I want to pose my question to Mr. Sivaselam. Sir, you have heard the panels speak about issues on ground, which are enforcement agencies not being up to date. There might be some mismatch between what the central government has been saying and what the state government has been saying. So how does one address this? What is the key learning from all these experiences of last few weeks? And particularly when you hear somebody like Prashant or Avinav speak about on-ground difficulties that their companies may have faced. Sir, what is your thoughts on this very important issue?
See, first, I would say one thing. I'm happy to hear from Abhinav that he found that the learning experience of people in the government in respect of certain issues were fast. And I'm happy because I was myself associated with some of those reactive aspects. I must say that when it was informed, Mr. Vipin Bora will bear me out. That was on 25th, when it was told that only essentials can move, and we pointed out to the concern to the government, because we were getting the necessary information that while milk was treated as an essential commodity, the packaging of milk was not treated as an essential commodity. So therefore, the granules were stopped at the borders or at the nakas, and then therefore we had to tell them that when you are allowing, as rightly was pointed out by both Prashant and Abhinav, the supply chain is an engine. It works it cannot work with one part out, and that's what happened. And we have, the government was quick to appreciate that point, and as you must have seen, they said that of course they didn't make it non-essential items, but they made it that anything to do with the essential thing, which has got to do with the essential item, would be treated as essential. So those were the learning experiences which came, and we were quick to react to it. See, but these situations are such that even for a person like some of us who act on the ground, I mean, everything came to a stop on a particular time frame. I mean, at the time possibly when we were all asleep. So when we woke up to a situation when everything had stopped. So that was the situation, and to that extent, I think we had we were able to overcome that and bring it to a proper shape, allowing even essentials, as was rightly realized, that when you are getting back. So
thank you, sir.
What we did, Continue.
Please continue, sir.
The supply lines were therefore declared free, and that happened within 4 days of the thing, and it was told that the vehicles could move, but the issue was the drivers had gone away, and several drivers had left the trucks and had gone away. So there was a problem. Even though the trucks were at the borders, there were no even when it was opened out, there were no drivers to take them away, and the trucks continued to remain at the borders, and it took almost 10 days before they could be cleared. Although the fact remains that within 3 days, at the end of the third day, all cargo was free to move. But we didn't expect. Maybe we could have done this at first itself to allow all supply chains to move. That would have been the right thing, and that will be one of the major learning lessons. That whatever happens, whenever you happen to do whatever you happen to do in this country, you need to keep the supply lines on, because when you're fighting a war, the first thing which you need to ensure are the supply lines. Supply lines are both essential and non-essential things, and that's what is a learning experience from this. And I'm pretty certain that we have learned it well and learned it fast. And that situation was to somewhat that learning experience was incorporated in the opening out of the manufacturing units, when we said that when manufacturing units opened out, apart from the requirement of social distancing, which was put in, and I would essentially put it that is put because people are now used to it, and they will ask that you are asking me to work without any facilitation. But I can only put a counter question to all of you. We had the ports open throughout. Nobody has reported with a COVID case in any of the ports which we are running. We are running 13 major ports, Mundra, Damra, Katupalli, even private ports. Nobody has reported with a COVID case. Now, how is that happening? There are several, we are having COVID cases at homes, but not in factories. So that's where it's a good thing to happen. But I think a lot of it has got to do with what I would call phased opening, so as to inculcate the sense of confidence in ourselves that we are doing the right thing, confidence in our employees that they are coming to a safe place. Maybe these things have got much greater things to do on the psychological side than on the practical side, because on the personal side, all of us are taking action at our own individual levels. I'm pretty certain that each one of us is taking care to move with the mask when we move out. We wash our hands as frequently as we did. Of course, I always had it as a habit, but still it's now even more fortified. But that's the way we go. And these are important to build what I would call the psychological sense of safety among each one of us, that people coming to work with us are safe, we are safe, and they feel safe because of us. So it's a huge complicated psychological satisfaction which we need to provide to each other, apart from whatever it does, which not yet thoroughly proven, but people believe in them and they feel that it has got a great deal of impact. Yes, being clean has its impact anyway, and that's the best thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that very insightful overview of the situation. Let me turn to Mr. Vora. Mr. Vora, as an industry veteran, you have heard the other representatives, Prashant and Avinav, speak about some of the issues they have faced. And you have also heard Mr. Sivaselam, with his vast experience, what he explained. Now, I would ask you, do you think that there is something more that the government could have done to help the industry? From your perspective, do you want to add something to what Mr. Sivaselam has already said?
See, what Mr. Sivaselam and other speakers have said, I agree with them. When initially in the first week, when everything came to a standstill, there was no movement of staff, nothing, no truck movement. And then when the trade went to Mr. Sivaselam and told them all the issues, he made a group, and he was the one who was taking the lead in solving all the issues, whether it was through the transport issues, whether it was customs issues, whether it was factories issues, any issue we went to him with the problems, and he has always solved those issues. Now, one major issue, other issue which has come to during this time is the air freight and rates. Now, because the airlines they stopped flying to India, all of a sudden, and there was so much of shortage of capacity. There was very few airlines which were coming into India for with the cargo. Only freighter airlines were allowed. That too, one or two airlines were only coming, and because there were a lot of material supplies which were supposed to come, raw material and other thing from China and from other countries. There were a lot of freighters which were arranged to bring the cargo into India, raw materials, but the freight rate went so high that a lot of people couldn't afford that, but they had to pay. Today also, even the same issue is there. There are a lot of airlines who are only bringing in freighters. Unfortunately, our Air India and domestic carrier, they have all those smaller aircraft. Air India doesn't have any cargo aircraft, so only foreign airlines are coming. And whatever rates they are asking, because we have a lot of pharma export going out of India, moving out of India every day, the rates are sky high. What we need is that more and more airlines to come to India with freighters, and Air India should take a lead to to take the cargo even on their passenger aircrafts. And India can become a real hub right now, because India is situated in such a place they can bring in cargo for Far East and other things. This is the time that Air India should prove themselves to be the leaders, and they can really make a lot of things. Fortunately, we have now, Spice Express and all who are operating freighters from China to India and other places. Even for perishables, we are operating freighters, every day now to move the perishable, because this is a mango season from Bombay, Alfonso mango, and there were no airlines, and the rates offered by few airlines were so high that they couldn't afford it. So that is one issue which is very, very important, that more and more airlines, once the passenger flights, right now they have announced for domestic flights, at least there will be some movement. But if the international flights starts, then it will come down. But otherwise, this is one thing which needs to be seen, very minutely, because our exports will become expensive, and that's what we don't want. We want our country to export more and more things rather than imports. So that's where we have to look into this. So you wanted to say? I think Mr. Shivasalam wants to add something over here.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead, sir.
So mic on.
Yeah, I'm through. I just want to carry on with the theme which Mr. Vipin Bora has introduced, and that's regarding cooperation in these situations. I think I must compliment him when he was the first person. We are all doing webinars and spending time, but let me tell you that the first webinar in COVID was started by Mr. Vipin Bora in the PhD Chamber of Commerce. And that was the first webinar which took place, I think, if it's not mistaken, 26th or 27th. And after that, the entire webinar went on. And we were expecting originally we were expecting about 25 people. 500 people joined in, and a lot of people complained that they were not allowed in. And that's where the whole webinar thing started. But what it did was not just talk. It created wonderful groups. Immediately, within half an hour of the conclusion of that webinar, we had the PhD Pharma group and the PhD Air Cargo group, both of them with the concerned people. Mr. Vipin Bora was also there. The Delhi airport was commissioned based on based on that group. Mumbai airport was done within 3 hours of that. Chennai airport was not far behind. It started off the next day, and rest of the thing is history. And this is what cooperative competition and cooperation among all players can do. Well, everybody had their business interest, but that business did not, that could take place only when the group could be together. And that's where I request Indo-French Chamber of Commerce to create such partnerships. And let me tell you, the experience of COVID, if at all there is a lasting experience of COVID, it is these groups. Even today, I am told that these groups are functioning and they have become much stronger in their applications. It is possible to do what Mr. Vipin Bora has stated. If Indo-French Chamber of Commerce were to take it, along with Air France, Airbus, and Air India, so that we always have a situation of both the flights coming full, and people on this side, the businessmen of the tribe of Mr. Vipin Vora. Similarly, you have the French side on the other side can always ensure that a cargo of about 100 or 200 tons is available, and we have a queue for that, so that we have these bottomed out prices. While the airlines also ensure that they are able to do the services, we are also able to ensure that the supply chains are not reserved for what I would call predatory pricing. It's possible to do that if an Indo-French Chamber of Commerce may be one of the right organizations to do this, and with businesses on either side who will cooperate in this exercise. You could start off with one freighter a day on either side, and it could expand, so that we can always say that if you are taking anything to Europe or nearby, you send it by a freighter of Air France or Air India, and vice versa, with the result that bookings could be organized and freight rates could be low. I thought I'll mention this because a lot of cooperation was facilitated in COVID, largely by businesses coming together to create platforms. And Indo-French Chamber of Commerce is itself a wonderful platform to start such cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you have pointed us to the right direction, that is towards the future and what next steps should be. So can I turn to Prashant and Avinav? First, Prashant, maybe quickly, what is the road ahead? What do you see as the future of this industry? Your thoughts, Prashant.
Yeah, I think road ahead is quite bright, and I am very optimistic that it has taught us a lot of things for future. It has exposed some of the inefficiencies in our system, and I think road ahead is adoption of technology and collection of data. Supply chain, we all know, is very interconnected. Every speaker has pointed this out, and I think government and the chambers have done really fantastic job in their response times in this particular crisis. What is required to be done is that we need to have a data in which we should be able to identify that if we have to run one particular sector, what those sectors will be constitute of. I think these differentiations and the data around it will play an important role when anything like this or any contingencies have to be dealt with. So I think digital acceptance is extremely critical, and automation in plants, so that we are able to really manage. As Mr. Shailen also pointed it out, that in factories there are no COVID cases, but in homes there are. I think in factories we have to be much better prepared for us to be sustainably operating for next few years. Thank you.
Yep.
Avinav,
For
your
me,
thoughts
I
quickly,
would
please.
be.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
For me, I would believe supply chain would gather a lot more importance than what it had previously, because a lot many things which are being done or the problems we have faced with it's much to do with supply chain. So it will be coming to forefront for sure. In terms of what would be the on-ground changes, I think people would go for automation for sure. So earlier, especially in markets like India with the manpower not so expensive, the cases were not like making much of a sense from financial perspective, many of the automation projects. So with the disruption which is occurring, especially in terms of manpower and all, I think companies would move a lot more towards automation. On the structural piece, again, I would believe companies would go more for flexible supply chains, which are shorter in nature. So imports, like if anybody is having an import line which is 60 days, 70 days long, you are at a more risk in terms of getting caught up with inventory which are not being required in the market right now. So to hedge the risk, I think people might go in for a shorter supply chain. At a more broader level, I think what the whole industry would be going towards is towards the mindset change of openness. So that is for sure. From the personal side, on the lighter side,
Thanks,
I would
Amit.
say. So
Sorry.
I love, yeah. So on the personal side,
Please
on
complete.
lighter note, I love longer hair, but now with salons closed, I had no option other than to try it on my own. I tried to cut my hair, and it went bad, and I'd actually had to go bald. So, and now what I feel is that I feel it liberating. So I'm using my trimmer every alternate day to get my hair trimmed. I actually feel good. So it's more about when you're forced into a situation, you might end up looking at the situation in a different way. So that's what it teaches us, I would say.
Fantastic thought, Abhinav. With that, let me move to my colleague Shampa. Shampa, you have heard the industry experts. Now, very quickly, on the tax front, is there any other measure that you would like the government to come up with to help the industry in these difficult times? Very quickly, your thoughts.
So there is definitely a lacuna which says, with respect to, like, you have the detention charges or the late fees which is applicable for imports under the ports. There is nothing which has been done for cargoes which come onto airline, as in the airports. That needs to be looked into, because there is a lot of cargo which is still hauled there. Similarly, they need to have more benefits to actually loosen out in terms of charges and fines and rentals only at the port area, which is the main focus as of now, and come up with more incentive schemes which does not add on to the costing factor in terms of outward supplies, that is delivery cost. These are the two main things that they need to look into, because every business sector would not be going in for options which will be related to either EPCG or imports. We have basic functions also which do not have imports at all, and do startups which have Make in India also. So those are the things which needs to be addressed.
Great. Thanks, Shampa. I think we are running short of time now. To do a quick wrap up, I'll request Mr. Vora first to give his last thoughts on this whole issue and what he sees the future to be like. Mr. Vora.
Let me tell you, just to reply to question, on the damage thing, there are a lot of things have been done. We have represented to the ministry and all those things, and basically the shipping lines, the CFSs and ICDs, they gave exemption till 18th of I think April, 18th of May.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
18th of May. But then after that, when this when this was extended till till end of May, they have not given. But let me tell you, the government is still giving them. Shipping ministry are very firm. They are issuing instructions to waive off these demurrage charges. But some CFSs and ICDs, they are not agreeing to it. So still it's going on. A
Absolutely.
lot of things are, lot of ICDs and CFSs have accepted after there's a letter which has come from shipping ministry. So we are still fighting with it, and some results will come. That's I just wanted to tell you on that. Now, as far as the
Right.
future is concerned, after COVID-19, I can tell you we have a in the logistic industry, the future is very, very bright. I have a strong opinion that a lot of production is going to move from China and to other places to India. Now, only thing is, few things the Indian government has to see, change few labor laws, give them more, easy access to the, to the infrastructure and other things. Now, once these things are changed, and a lot of industry is going to move to India in the production base, we have a lot of, mobile phones, automobile industries, OEMs, all those things. The other day I was talking to a Japanese company. There are more than 20,000 Japanese companies. They are having production in China. In India, there are only 1,200. So there is so much of scope now. If they are moving out, India can get those industries. So future, I'll say another 6 months or 1 year down the line, there will be a lot of, movements of cargo, export, import, both ways. And in the logistic industries, I'm very, very optimistic that it's going to boom. It's going to boom, So that's what I can say. We are quite positive. Personally, I'm quite very positive on this, and let's hope that it goes like.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your views on this. And with that, I turn to Mr. Sivaselam for his final word on this issue, because I think he started this session today, and I think it is only fitting that he gives his valuable inputs even at the end. Sir, over to you.
First of all, I am very optimistic, and I mentioned it that the French India the France India partnership and the Indo-French Chamber of Commerce is going to be very busy, and I think in the next 3 years you might be more than doubling whatever you are doing now, and there are a lot of avenues to work in India in which French India partnership will be of great importance. Logistics partnership shall be the highway on which it will move, and that logistics partnership can extend both to air as well as shipping. And I would expect that now that we know the significance of of a good and efficient logistics, the Indo-French Chamber of Commerce will work extra time and ensure that within 3 to 6 months you have those highways of shipping and air cargo created, so that the businesses are able to leverage it. And some of the areas I have already identified it for you. These are all low-hanging fruit as far as Indo-French partnerships are concerned. For other bilateral business partnership, they may be very difficult. But this particular ecosystem created in this Chamber of Commerce can be taken to greater heights if this chamber devotes a little bit more attention. Not that you have not been doing it, but I think the time has come to actualize them now. And I'm optimistic about it and expecting a great boost to Indo-French cooperation. And I must, while closing, I particularly reserved it for the end. I think you have a very wonderful financial institution to support you, and that is the AFD. I myself had anecdotal evidence of working with that wonderful organization. I entered that organization as a single person and managed to get a 110 euro loan, the first euro loan by an AFD to any non-financial institution anywhere in their portfolio. And that was very nice people to work with. And that is a wonderful financial institution for us to leverage. They are willing to do it. Just now you have seen a huge French-German grant. AFD could also get some of them for this group. Not that it should be done as a grant, even as a financial, on a purely financial aspect of Indo-French partnership, it will make huge sense. Plus, there is a private sector window of AFD, which should also make a lot of difference and support for all of us. In parting, I must say that if the group were to create and discuss with their customers relating to working capital management for the next 6 months, I think we would have done a lot of it to support businesses of all of us and to support all businesses which are dependent on us. Thank you, and I'm expecting a great way forward from this wonderful Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, sir. I think with that, we have come to the end of the panel discussion. Thank you, all the panelists. Over to you.
Thank you, Raj. I think in the interest of time, we would skip the Q&A, but I would still request if we can take one last question. Participants can unmute themselves and ask the question. So we'll wait for some time to see if we have a question. I think we'll conclude the session with this note. And in case we have any questions, the teams can reach out to the IFCCI team. I would like to now conclude the session with a vote of thanks, starting with Ms. Paila Kanwar, Director General of IFCCI, Mr. Weber Vora, Chairman of the IFCCI Logistics Committee and MD of Continental Carriers. A special thanks to Shri N. Sevaselam, former Special Secretary Logistics. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your time and your commitment towards this forum. And obviously observations by our knowledge partner, Rajshri Chakrabarti and Shampa. And to all our panelists, Mr. Avinav Sinha, who's the Country Manager Supply Chain and Logistics for Michelin India, and Mr. Prashant Shula, Head of Supply Chain Rocket India, and last but not the least, Mr. Vipin Vora, Chairman of Continental Carriers Private Limited.
Thank you.
With that, we conclude the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you.